You are watching The World 24/7 on the NDTV network. I'm Parmeshwar Bawa. Let's begin with the headlines we're tracking at the moment. The Bank of England cuts interest rates from a 16-year high after a tight vote by its policymakers, who were split over whether inflation pressures had eased sufficiently. Meanwhile, Japan's stocks nosedived almost 5% on opening, with most Asia-Pacific markets lower after a sell-off on Wall Street overnight. Muhammed, the commander of Hamas's military wing, was killed in an Israeli airstrike in the southern Gaza Strip last month. This is what the Israel Defense Forces have now confirmed. The United States and Russia have completed their biggest prisoner swap in post-Soviet history, with Moscow releasing journalist Evan Gershkovich and fellow American, Paul Whelan, along with dissidents including Vladimir Kara-Murza, in a multinational deal that set 24 people free. CrowdStrike is being sued by its shareholders after a faulty software update by the cybersecurity firm crashed more than 8 million computers and caused chaos around the world. Ground temperatures in Antarctica have soared more than 28 degrees Celsius above normal in the second major heatwave to afflict the region in the past 2 years. Now, this historic warm spell could persist for another 10 days. Intel's on a long road to recovery, and over 15,000 workers will no longer be coming along for the ride. The chipmaker has just announced it's downsizing its workforce by over 15% as part of a new $10 billion cost-saving plan for 2025. Well, our big focus: Japan's stocks nosedived almost 5% on opening, with most Asia-Pacific markets lower after a sell-off on Wall Street overnight. In fact, the Nikkei extended its 2.62% slide on Thursday to lead losses in the region and reach its lowest level since February. Meanwhile, the Bank of England cut interest rates for the first time since 2020 as inflation cooled. The decision came a day after the US Federal Reserve held rates steady, but left the door open for a future cut if data continue to show inflation slowing. The Bank of England's governor said it would be careful not to cut rates too much or too quickly for fear of fueling inflationary pressures. Meanwhile, as I mentioned, US investors triggered a major sell-off on Wall Street on Thursday, set off by fears that the job market is cooling, manufacturing is slowing, and the Federal Reserve has left cutting interest rates too late to head off a recession. The Dow Jones fell nearly 500 points, while the S&P 500 was also down 1.3%. A series of disappointing results from tech companies have led to sell-offs in big tech in the US. The Bank of Japan additionally raised rates in a surprising and aggressive move that caught the market off guard, delivering a 1-2 punch of a rate change and a reduction in bond purchases that a week ago was considered highly unlikely. For further clarity, we have with us Chairman of Chain IQ Asia, Girija Pandey, joining us live from Singapore. Thank you so much, Mr. Pandey, for joining us. The gloomy sentiment in Asia markets, it comes after a sell-off on Wall Street in Thursday's trading session, which actually saw 3 major US indexes plunge on recession fears. Mr. Pandey, take us through the ripple effects, the wider ramifications.
See, you've got to look at it across. In Europe, we've had ECB cutting in June, cutting rates. The Swiss central bank also followed. So we've seen the rate cutting in Europe where the inflation is lower. Bank of England also fell in line because the inflation in UK is low in their 2% target. So depending on the way Europe has gone, we've seen the Bank of England rate cut. Now, the US is very different in some ways because the economy is strong. The employment numbers have been strong. And if you look at what the Fed chairman said, while he indicated there could be a cut in September, he was quite cautious that it will be data dependent on whether inflation comes down. Inflation in the US is still running around 3%, and which is ahead of their target of 2%. So I think people are cautious in US to cut rates before they can see some very clear signal that inflation is coming down and the economy is not getting into a recession. So I think that's the background to all these 3 or 4 rate cuts that have the rate cuts in Europe and the fact that there may be a rate cut in the US later.
Right. Also, meanwhile, the Bank of England's interest rate cut, it was greeted with relief in the UK Treasury, where the Chancellor Rachel Reeves is trying to actually revive economic growth and tackle what Labour has said is a £22 billion hole in public finances. So what are your first thoughts?
Well, certainly there's a new government with a big majority which is now in place. They have a growth plan. They want to grow the economy. And therefore, there is some joy around that, this is a new government which is very well positioned to start growing the UK economy. UK has had a very weak performance for various reasons in the last few years. And the rate cut is, I think, it's part of the Labour government's plan and the budget that they have announced. And also the Eurozone has cut rates. So they are in line with what is happening in Europe. So I think you have to look at both sides.
Right, but can we term this a hawkish cut? Is the sterling expected to gradually strengthen? Because many say that there's further easing likely in the coming months as the disinflationary trends continue into the new year.
Well, the Bank of England's summary, the statement was quite cautious for further rate cuts. They haven't cleared that thing. I think the sterling will gain ground, certainly. It's from 1.27, it will certainly go up because the economy will start growing. But there are risks of inflation. There are wage growth inflation still running high in UK. So they've done it because, but they've been rather cautious about what the future rate cuts will be in UK.
As always, Mr. Pandey, thank you so much for making time for us and joining us on The World 24/7.
Thank you very much.
With that, let's turn our attention to the other crucial story we're tracking. The Israeli military has said that it has confirmed that the head of Hamas's military wing, Muhammed Deif, was killed in an airstrike in Gaza in July. This announcement came a day after an apparent Israeli strike in the Iranian capital killed Hamas's top political leader. But why exactly does this matter? Israeli officials say Deif was one of the primary masterminds of the October 7 attacks that killed some 1,200 people. Now, if confirmed, his death would actually mean Israel killed Hamas's top military commander and top political leader in just over 2 weeks. He quickly rose through Hamas ranks. He's known as a master bomb maker. He's orchestrated the attacks on Israel. Deif is the leader of the Al-Qassam Brigade's Hamas's military wing. And Muhammed Deif has transformed Hamas's military wing. And by the way, he has survived over 8 assassination attempts. What we can disclose is that he has spent decades underground in the tunnel network. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant called Deif the Osama bin Laden of Gaza and claimed his death showed Hamas is disintegrating. But the rapid events this week have left the United States, Egyptian and Qatari mediators scrambling to salvage talks for a ceasefire deal in Gaza. At the same time, international diplomats want to avert an escalation into an all-out regional war after the killing in Tehran of Hamas's Ismail Haniyeh, Israel's killing of a top Hezbollah commander in Beirut in a strike, and now Israel's announcement of Deif's death in July. Hamas's political bureau said in a statement that it was up to the group's military wing to confirm or deny Deif's death, and that no such confirmation had been made just yet.
We've been here speaking to the Foreign Minister, the Speaker, the Prime Minister. There are ways in which those individuals are able to get direct messages to Hezbollah. We know that, and that is why we're here, to communicate the need for de-escalation and to be absolutely clear that it is in no one's interests to see regional war. Now, the message that we're hearing is no one wants to see war here in Lebanon. That's why we're here, to apply all diplomatic effort to dial this situation down.
Meanwhile, the United States and Russia have completed a major prisoner swap, the largest in post-Soviet history, with Moscow releasing Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich and fellow American Paul Whelan in a multinational deal. In fact, Thursday's swap set some 24 people free, according to officials in Turkey, where the exchange took place. The West obtained the release of 16 people from Russia, including 5 Germans and 7 Russian political prisoners, according to a statement by the US president. Russia, meanwhile, secured the freedom of several of its own nationals convicted of serious crimes in the West.
The deal that made this possible was a feat of diplomacy and friendship. Multiple countries helped get this done. They joined the difficult, complex negotiations at my request, and I personally thank them all again. And I've thanked them personally, and I'll thank them again. All told, Russia has released 16 prisoners. 8 Russians who are being held in the West will be sent home as well. These 16 prisoners from Russia that Russia has released include 4 Americans, 5 Germans, 7 Russian citizens who are political prisoners in their own country.
For further clarity, we have with us Executive Director of RSF USA, Clayton Weas. Thanks so much, Clayton, for joining us on the NDTV network. The trade unfolded despite relations between Washington and Moscow being at their lowest points since the Cold War after Putin's invasion of Ukraine. What was your first reaction to the news of the prisoner swap, Clayton?
My first reaction when I heard the news was pure relief. We have been fighting to get Evan released for 16 long months. It's been an arduous process, but this makes it all worth it. And I have to give a lot of credit to our partners who have been working on this, especially the Wall Street Journal, his employer, who has done an amazing job of keeping Evan's story in the news and in the public consciousness. And I have to tip my hat to everyone working in the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs Office at the State Department, who have done incredibly professional work in securing this historic deal. I also want to mention Alsu Kurmasheva, the American journalist for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, who is also part of this deal. We have confirmed that she's been freed and will be rejoining her family very soon. She's been detained for the past 9 months, also for the crime of journalism. It has been clear for some time now that journalism is effectively illegal in Russia. The Kremlin has completely cracked down on the free press, and it is taking state hostages who are journalists in order to hold them for a later trade to secure Russian prisoners from abroad.
Right. In fact, I came across a report that mentioned negotiators in back-channel talks at one point also explored an exchange involving Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. Could you share some details on how such deals are reached, Clayton?
Sure. Well, it all takes place very secretly at the highest levels. We are very aware of the important work that officials at the State Department have been doing all along to secure Evan and Alsu's release from prison, and apparently have been doing a great deal of work to secure even more prisoners, because this prisoner swap it includes a huge number of detainees. It really is a historic day and such a happy day for all of these wrongfully detained prisoners who are going to get to rejoin their families and walk free again when, frankly, they didn't know if they ever would be able to. So it's a hugely hopeful day. But we should also remember, these journalists should not have been in jail in the first place. They were arrested for being journalists. They were convicted of crimes associated with their journalism. And it's clear that this is the tactic that the Kremlin is going to use going forward. And it's paying dividends for them in that they are able to secure the release of very high value Russian prisoners in foreign prisons. These people include assassins, convicted spies, arms traffickers. It's really astonishing, the level of criminal that's been exchanged for wrongly detained journalists. It's clear that democracies of the world need to find a way to increase the cost of bad actors like the Russian regime from taking hostages of journalists and other citizens who don't belong in prison.
But Clayton, there are strong arguments that this deal, like others before it, reflect about an innate imbalance because the US and allies gave up Russians charged or convicted of serious crimes in exchange for Russia releasing journalists, dissidents, and others imprisoned by the country's highly politicized legal system on charges seen by the West as trumped up. Then what is the significance of the timing of this deal, given these are Joe Biden's last few months in office?
Well, it certainly is a feather in his cap. This will be definitely a part of his legacy as president going forward. It is always extremely complicated to negotiate the release of American prisoners who are held abroad, particularly in a country where the relations are particularly hostile with Washington. And to be able to secure 4 American prisoners in one deal, 3 American prisoners in a single deal, 2 journalists plus Paul Whelan, another American citizen, it's really a coup.
Well, you touched upon this briefly, but let's just dive into it deeper. How difficult has it become for journalists globally to report freely and be critical of those in power as more autocratic leaders rise to the fore?
Yeah, well, RSF puts out an annual ranking of every country's press freedom in the world in our World Press Freedom Index. And in 2024, we found the greatest decline in press freedom across the board that we've ever recorded, which speaks to the deteriorating conditions for journalism in many parts of the world. That's reflected in authoritarian backsliding in once strong democratic countries. And an increased hostility towards the press, especially from far right and far left movements around the world. But we talk often about this problem of impunity for crimes against journalists.
Right.
And I think that's really important because too seldom are we able to impose any kind of a cost or a penalty to the autocrats and the other bad actors who are arresting, harassing, even killing journalists. We all need to do a better job of holding these people accountable so that journalists can be safe to do their essential jobs. There is no democracy without journalism. And so every time a journalist is prevented from doing their jobs, the rest of us citizens understand the world a little bit worse.
Indeed. Clayton, also the Russian side got Vadim Krasikov, who was actually convicted in Germany in 2021 and sentenced to life in prison for killing a former Chechen rebel. Russia also received 2 alleged sleeper agents jailed in Slovenia, as well as 3 men who were charged by federal authorities in the US. Don't you think Russia has a bit of an advantage in such prisoner swap deals?
Well, yeah, that's a really important point. There's this huge discrepancy because the United States and other strong democracies are not going around arbitrarily arresting Russian journalists to hold them for future exchanges like this. And look at the type of prisoner that is going back to Russia in exchange for not just journalists, but human rights activists. They're assassins, they're warlords, they're arms dealers, they're hackers. They're spies. These are very high value prisoners who have been convicted of very serious crimes. It's clear that that's the Kremlin's playbook, is to arbitrarily arrest Americans and other Western citizens in order to hold them as bargaining chips, and we have to find a response to that.
Clayton, thanks so much for joining us with the latest updates. Really appreciate you making time for us on The World 24/7. With that, let's turn our attention now to CrowdStrike, which is being sued by its shareholders after a faulty software update by the cybersecurity firm crashed more than 8 million computers and caused chaos around the world. The lawsuit accuses the company of making false and misleading statements about its software testing. It actually also says the company's share price dropped 32% in the 12 days after the incident, causing a loss in market value of $25 billion. Now, what is CrowdStrike saying? Well, it has denied the allegations and says it will defend itself against the proposed class action lawsuit. Meanwhile, Intel's on a long road to recovery, and over 15,000 workers will no longer be coming along for this ride with them. The chipmaker just announced it's downsizing its workforce by over 15% as part of a new $10 billion cost savings plan for 2025, which will mean a headcount reduction of greater than 15,000 roles. The company currently employs over 125,000 workers, so layoffs could be as many as 19,000 people actually. Intel will reduce its R&D and marketing spend by billions each year. This is through 2026. It will reduce capital expenditures by more than 20% this year. It will restructure to stop non-essential work, and it will also review all active projects and equipment to make sure it's not spending too much. Well, news and updates continue in a moment right after this very short break. Do stay tuned. Welcome back. Antarctica is experiencing its second extreme heat wave in the last 3 years. Here are the finer details for you. A vast swath of Antarctica is experiencing a near-record winter heat wave in a disturbing sign of the polar temperature spikes brought by a warming world. Ground temperatures in Antarctica have soared more than 28 degrees Celsius above normal in the second major heat wave to afflict the region in the past 2 years. This historic warm spell could persist for another 10 days and is an ominous example of the major temperature spikes this polar climate could experience more frequently in a warming world. Because the heat wave comes in the middle of the Antarctic winter, temperatures are still hovering around minus 20 degrees Celsius. Still, the Antarctic temperature anomaly is the largest on the globe according to weather models. While the South Pole Station will clinch its warmest July since 2002, about 6.3 degrees Celsius above average, the largest heat wave in Antarctica and anywhere in the world occurred in March 2022, when the eastern coast of Antarctica spiked at least 39 degrees Celsius above normal. Believe it or not, scientists on site wore shorts and removed their shirts while the area experienced intense melting. But what is causing the heat wave? Winter temperatures in Antarctica substantially fluctuate because of the lack of sunlight, but this heat wave is a much larger deviation from the norm than usual. It's too early to determine all of its causes, but scientists say it may be at least partially linked to processes occurring about 30 kilometers above the surface in the stratosphere. Atmospheric pressures over East Antarctica are also surging to absolute bonkers levels, tweeted Ben Knoll, a meteorologist and IMD scientist based in New Zealand. The weather in the southern hemisphere is a little wild at the moment, he wrote. Several other factors may be helping to intensify the heat wave. Antarctic sea ice cover is the second lowest on record for this time of the year, just barely above the record-breaking levels in 2023. As the globe warms, however, the poles are warming at an even faster rate. Recent ice core data and modeling show Antarctica is warming up twice as fast as the global average. This is the second extraordinary heat wave to hit the continent in the past 2 years, with the last causing the collapse of an ice shelf the size of Rome. Parmeshwar Bawa for NDTV.